The quiet before the storm. It was an ordinary day on Earth, or at least that's what people thought. The sky was clear, the sun was shining, and the world was going about its daily routine. But something was off, something that couldn't be explained, and it started with a strange sound. It came from the sky, a low hum, barely noticeable at first. People brushed it off as a passing anomaly, maybe a distant airplane or some other earthly noise. But it didn't stop. The sound grew louder, more persistent, until it seemed to come from everywhere. People began to notice it, looking up from their daily tasks, wondering if anyone else heard it too. In a remote military outpost, technicians sat at their stations, listening intently to the strange hum. The sound didn't match any frequency they were familiar with. It wasn't a plane, a satellite, or anything they had ever detected. For hours they listened, trying to decode its origin, but the hum remained just out of reach. By nightfall, the hum had turned into a low vibration. People could feel it in their bones. Earth had never experienced anything like this before. It was as if the very planet itself was trembling, though no earthquake had occurred. Still, the world tried to go on as usual, but unease spread like wildfire. News outlets reported on the phenomenon, but no one had any answers. No one knew where the sound was coming from. Meanwhile, in the highest offices of the United Nations, world leaders gathered to discuss the situation. The hum could be heard faintly even inside the conference room. There was an odd sense of tension in the air, something none of them could explain. The intelligence agencies were alerted, and every satellite orbiting the planet was tasked with scanning for any unusual signals. But still, nothing made sense. Hours turned into days, and the hum persisted. No one knew what was causing it. And worse yet, no one knew why it had started. Across the globe, scientists and military experts were baffled, trying to find a logical explanation. But the truth was, they were beginning to fear there might not be one. Then, on the third day, everything changed. A signal was intercepted, a clear transmission that was unlike anything Earth had ever received. It wasn't from any known satellite, nor was it from any human-made source. The message was brief, only 3 words: prepare for impact. The message sent shockwaves through the global community. How could this be possible? Who was sending this message? Was Earth under attack? Panic quickly set in. Governments issued emergency alerts, and people around the world rushed to secure their homes. Military forces were put on high alert, and the UN quickly convened an emergency session. The message was analyzed, and it was confirmed that it came from outside the solar system. The implications were too enormous to grasp. Who would send a message like this? Why Earth? What did it mean? In the midst of the chaos, there were whispers. Some people said it was a warning from an alien race. Others believed it was some kind of advanced technology malfunction. But the question on everyone's mind was simple: what was coming, and how could they stop it? The governments of the world had no answers. They had prepared for many things: natural disasters, nuclear threats, even possible asteroid impacts. But an alien invasion? No one had considered that. And yet, here they were, staring into the unknown. The military began scrambling to put together a defense plan. But the truth was, they didn't know what they were up against. They didn't know if Earth was facing an invasion, a natural disaster, or something else entirely. The unknown was the most terrifying part. There had been no warning, no signs that anything like this was coming. It felt like a nightmare, one that they couldn't wake up from. As the world prepared for the worst, one thing became painfully clear: Earth was no longer alone in the universe. The hum had not been a coincidence. It had been a signal from someone, or something, out there, watching. And now, whatever was coming was closer than anyone dared to imagine. For the first time in history, the people of Earth stood united in their fear of the unknown. The calm before the storm was over, and the storm was coming. As the days passed, the vibration in the air grew stronger. People couldn't help but feel a sense of impending doom. as if something catastrophic was just beyond the horizon. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. But it wasn't the end. No, it was only the beginning. A strange energy filled the air, and the sky seemed to darken. The calm before the storm had been a fleeting moment, a moment that would never be forgotten. As Earth waited, breath held in anticipation, one thing was certain. The world was about to change forever, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days following the mysterious message were tense. Earth's government scrambled to gather information, but there was little to be found. Scientists and military experts alike were at a loss. It wasn't until the third day after the transmission that the world would finally get its first answer, and it would be a terrifying one. The silence that followed the cryptic warning had been short-lived. Late in the evening, an enormous tremor shook the entire planet. Buildings swayed, windows rattled, and the earth beneath their feet seemed to groan as if something vast and powerful was shifting below. The hum had returned, louder than before. But this time, it wasn't just a sound, it was felt. Across the globe, people rushed into the streets. Fear had overtaken them. Whatever this was, it was real. It wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't a hoax. The vibrations seemed to grow stronger, pulsing like the beating of some monstrous heart. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the vibrations stopped. The world held its breath. What would come next? It didn't take long for the answer to come. At the very same moment the tremors had ceased, the skies above Earth were ripped open. Not by an explosion, but by something far more terrifying. A fleet of ships. They appeared in the atmosphere, descending from above at incredible speed. Massive warships, their dark silhouettes almost swallowing the light of the stars. The ships hovered over major cities around the world, blocking out the sun as they descended. The ships were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Sleek and angular, their dark metal surfaces shimmered under the harsh light of the sun. They seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, an energy that hummed in the air. No one knew what to do. The military scrambled to respond, but there was little they could do against an enemy that they couldn't even understand. As the ships descended further, the world held its breath. What was the purpose of these visitors? Was this an invasion? A warning? No one could say for sure. Then, as the ships hovered over the ground, a message was broadcasted worldwide. The voice was deep, mechanical, and chilling, as though it came from something not quite human. The words were simple but heavy with meaning. Earth has been marked. At that moment, panic erupted across the globe. What did it mean? Marked for what? Destruction. Subjugation. The message left more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Earth was under threat, and the rest of the galaxy was watching. The response was swift but futile. Earth's military forces launched everything they had: fighter jets, missiles, and anti-aircraft weapons. But it was as though the enemy ships didn't even notice. They simply absorbed the attacks, their hulls glowing as the missiles exploded harmlessly against them. The ships didn't retaliate. They just watched. And then, the first strike came. Without warning, a beam of bright energy shot down from the lead ship. It struck the ground in the middle of a major city, one of the largest in the world. The explosion was unlike anything Earth had ever seen. The blast vaporized everything within a 10-mile radius. Buildings were reduced to rubble in an instant, and thousands of lives were lost in mere seconds. The air was thick with dust and smoke, and a haunting silence followed, broken only by the distant sounds of alarm and chaos. The destruction was mind-boggling. A few minutes ago, the world had been full of life and activity. Now, it was a scene from a nightmare. The sheer scale of the devastation sent a shiver down the spine of everyone who saw it. World leaders quickly convened an emergency meeting. They had never seen anything like this before. They tried to coordinate a response, but they had no idea who or what they were dealing with. Earth had never been prepared for an extraterrestrial threat of this magnitude. The military's weapons were useless, and it became clear that humanity's greatest strength, its technology, was no match for these invaders. The question on everyone's mind was simple. Why? Why Earth? Had humanity unknowingly offended someone, or had they been marked for destruction from the very beginning? In the midst of the chaos, the Galactic Council, which had watched the events unfold from afar, was beginning to take notice. The message had been clear. Earth was no longer just a small planet on the edge of the galaxy. It had attracted the attention of something far older, far more dangerous, and far more powerful than anything the world had ever known. The first strike was just the beginning. The enemy wasn't interested in negotiations. They weren't interested in peace. The war had begun, and humanity was standing on the edge of extinction. As the world came to terms with the terrifying new reality, there was one thing that kept echoing through the minds of every survivor. If humanity was going to survive, they would have to fight with everything they had. The world was in chaos. The air was thick with fear, and every city on Earth now looked over its shoulder, waiting for the next strike. The destruction from the first attack had been catastrophic, and it was clear that the enemy wasn't just here for a warning. They had come to annihilate. In the wake of the attack, Earth's leaders met with urgency and desperation. The United Nations, now the last hope for global unity, called an emergency summit to organize a response. Military forces were mobilized, and every available resource was thrown into preparation. The most advanced weapons humanity could muster, nuclear warheads, experimental energy shields, and cybernetic troops, were all placed under one banner: survival. But as they strategized, a cold, hard truth began to settle in. Humanity's weapons, though impressive, paled in comparison to the invaders' might. They had no answers. They couldn't even touch the enemy's ships, which hovered above the ground with ease, immune to any technology Earth had at its disposal. The attack had been so overwhelming, so precise, that all they could do was wait for the next blow to fall. Across the globe, people gathered in shelters, hiding from the unknown. They held on to their loved ones, hoping against hope that they would survive. Governments began to issue evacuation orders, moving civilians to underground bunkers, but there was no way to ensure safety. The world felt hopeless, like a planet on the verge of extinction. Yet, amid this terror, there was something stirring, an idea that, against all odds, could turn the tide. Humanity's strength had always been its ingenuity, its ability to adapt and overcome impossible odds. Even as the world seemed to crumble, brilliant minds around the globe began working together in secret. Scientists, engineers, and military leaders pooled their knowledge. They knew they had no time to waste. The idea that emerged was bold, audacious, and perhaps the last hope for mankind: the Earth Defense Coalition. This was no simple military strategy. The Earth Defense Coalition was a full-scale effort to build a unified global force that could rival the invaders' technology. It wasn't just about missiles or warships. It was about creating a weapon they couldn't predict. The coalition began to repurpose everything from space stations to old military satellites to create an unprecedented defense network in Earth's atmosphere. It was a monumental effort, requiring the cooperation of every nation, every scientist, every soldier. But even as humanity began its desperate race to prepare for the next attack, there was another problem. The enemy didn't seem to be in any hurry. The ships hovered ominously, waiting, watching, and offering no clue as to what their next move would be. Then, without warning, the message came again. The same mechanical voice echoed through the global communication systems. It was chilling, like the voice of death itself. Humanity, your time is running out. You have no defenses. You cannot escape your fate. The message sent waves of dread through the population. It was as if the invaders were toying with humanity, letting them scramble, letting them build their defenses, knowing full well they were wasting their time. But Earth wasn't giving up. Humanity's resolve was tested like never before. People didn't just wait for the inevitable. They fought back. Leaders emerge, both on the battlefield and behind the scenes, pushing humanity's resolve to its limits. It wasn't just about saving themselves anymore. It was about proving that Earth wouldn't go down without a fight. The first test of this new resistance came within weeks. A large alien ship, the flagship of the invading fleet, descended into Earth's atmosphere once again. The Earth Defense Coalition had finished its first phase, a vast experimental weapon built to launch a direct attack on the invaders' technology. The weapon was a prototype, still untested and fragile, but it was humanity's first true weapon capable of causing real damage. It was a massive energy cannon, positioned on a space station high above Earth, capable of firing concentrated plasma beams. The weapon had been created using Earth's most advanced technology and the knowledge gained from studying the wreckage of the first attack. As the enemy ship descended, the world held its breath. It was a moment of truth. The cannon fired, and for the first time, it struck true. The beam hit the alien ship, and a massive explosion erupted. The ship shook violently, and its sleek exterior cracked and burned under the intensity of the blast. But the enemy didn't retreat. Instead, the ship released a powerful shockwave that sent the cannon's energy network into overload. The cannon exploded in a burst of bright light, and the defensive network collapsed. The aliens had countered the attack with ease, and Earth had lost its first real weapon. The loss was devastating. The feeling of victory was short-lived. But in the midst of this crushing defeat, something unexpected happened. Humanity did not give up. Instead, it only made them more determined. The war had only just begun, but Earth had learned something crucial. The invaders were not invincible. They could bleed. They could be hurt. And now, the battle was personal. Humanity had lost its first major weapon, but it had gained something far more valuable, a fire that could not be extinguished. The fight for Earth was far from over. The loss of the weapon shook humanity to its core. But in that moment of despair, something remarkable began to stir within the hearts of those fighting for Earth. They had come to understand a terrifying truth. The invaders could be hurt. They were not as invincible as they seemed. This realization sparked a new wave of defiance that rippled across the globe. The Earth Defense Coalition, though crippled by the failure of its weapon, began to regroup. The loss had taught them a valuable lesson. Brute force alone would not defeat the enemy. They needed a new strategy, one that could outsmart the invaders. As scientists worked tirelessly in underground labs and military strategists gathered in secret war rooms, the focus shifted from direct confrontation to disruption. The coalition realized they had one advantage that the invaders could not match: human ingenuity. A team of brilliant minds, led by Dr. Clara Haywood, one of Earth's foremost experts in artificial intelligence, began working on a new plan. They would create a weapon not of firepower, but of information. Using the very technology the invaders relied on, they would infiltrate their systems, disrupting their command networks from the inside. It was risky, but it was their only option. The plan was simple in theory, but extremely difficult in execution. The invaders' ships operated using a highly advanced neural network, a system that allowed them to control everything from communication to weapon systems. If they could hack into this network, they could turn the tide of the war. But the challenge was immense. Earth had never faced such a sophisticated system before. The enemy had total control over their ships, and trying to breach their defenses would be like trying to break through an unbreakable wall. Dr. Haywood and her team developed a plan to send a small group of elite soldiers aboard a captured alien ship. Their mission: infiltrate the enemy's main command ship and upload a virus into its neural network. It was a suicide mission. No one knew what would happen once they tried to hack into the invaders' systems. The risk was unimaginable, but it was their only hope. While the soldiers prepared for the most dangerous mission Earth had ever seen, a sense of anticipation hung over the planet. Humanity's will to fight had been awakened. The people of Earth, once terrified and hopeless, began to rally behind the Earth Defense Coalition. Nations that had once been divided were now united, all fighting for the survival of the human race. They knew they were up against a force beyond their comprehension, but they also knew one thing: they would not go down without a fight. The soldiers trained relentlessly, using alien technology to adapt and develop new tactics. They studied the enemy's weaknesses and discovered one startling fact. The invaders, while powerful, had never encountered anything quite like Earth's soldiers. The invaders' military, though technologically superior, lacked the unpredictable nature and resilience of humanity. Earth's soldiers fought not just with strength, but with heart. As the mission day drew closer, there was a sense of quiet determination among the soldiers. They knew they were walking into the unknown, into the heart of the enemy's stronghold, where they would face death with no guarantee of success. But there was something else that drove them, something that had become clear in the wake of the first battles. The invaders were not unstoppable. They could be beaten. The soldiers were sent off in silence, their ships entering the vastness of space, heading toward the heart of the enemy's territory. The Earth Defense Coalition held its breath as the soldiers neared the alien flagship. The mission, though a long shot, was humanity's best hope. Back on Earth, the rest of the population could only wait. They had given everything they had to the cause. The Earth Defense Coalition's forces were ready for the final confrontation, but their fate now rested on the shoulders of a handful of brave souls. As the soldiers aboard the alien ship prepared to launch their final assault, the enemy had no idea what was coming. The invaders had believed they were untouchable, that their control over the galaxy was absolute. But they had underestimated the one thing they could never predict: human resolve. In the depths of space, aboard the enemy's command ship, the soldiers began their daring operation. They infiltrated the alien vessel with stealth and precision, making their way to the heart of the command center. The tension was unbearable as they approached their target, the core of the invaders' neural network. They planted the virus and activated it, knowing that the slightest mistake could cost them everything. The virus spread quickly, infiltrating the invaders' systems faster than they could react. Panic spread among the alien forces as their ships, once invincible, began to glitch and falter. Communications were severed, weapon systems malfunctioned, and the invaders' once impenetrable fleet became vulnerable. The tables had turned. With the invaders' systems in chaos, Earth's forces launched their counteroffensive. Ships that had once been helpless against the alien onslaught now fought with renewed strength, taking advantage of the sudden confusion. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, humanity had a real chance. The Earth Defense Coalition's forces, inspired by the success of the infiltration mission, launched a full-scale attack on the invaders' ships. The war was no longer one-sided. The invaders, once so sure of their victory, now found themselves in a fight for their survival. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been their advanced technology or their strength. It was their unyielding spirit. Against all odds, Earth had struck back. And this time, the invaders would have to reckon with the resilience of the human race. The battle raged across the stars as Earth's forces took full advantage of the sudden chaos in the invaders' fleet. The tide had truly turned, and humanity was proving the impossible. They could stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful empire the galaxy had ever known. But while the soldiers and generals on the battlefield felt a rush of adrenaline, the reality of war remained heavy on their shoulders. In the vastness of space, the Earth Defense Coalition's fleet had grown stronger. The viral attack on the invaders' neural network had turned their sophisticated war machines into vulnerable targets. The alien ships, once invincible, now floated aimlessly, their weapons and shields useless. However, the enemy had not given up. They had become desperate, realizing that their once certain victory was slipping away. As the invaders scrambled to regain control of their forces, humanity seized the opportunity to press forward. However, victory was not assured. The invaders, though struggling, were not without their resources. In secret command centers, high-ranking officers from the Galactic Empire plotted their next move. They had underestimated Earth, but they would not make the same mistake again. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the scientists, engineers, and strategists who had worked tirelessly to develop the virus and infiltrate the enemy's systems were hailed as heroes. Dr. Clara Haywood, the brilliant mind behind the hacking operation, found herself in a new position of leadership. Yet even as she received accolades, the truth of the situation weighed heavily on her. The invasion was far from over. It was only just beginning. "We've made a dent," Dr. Haywood said to her team as they monitored the progress of the offensive. "But they'll adapt. They always do. We need to stay ahead of them, or our victory will be short-lived." Her words rang true. The invaders were already making adjustments. A new fleet of warships was being constructed, and they had started employing more aggressive tactics. Earth's forces, though emboldened, would need to remain vigilant. Every victory came at a cost, and the loss of so many soldiers weighed heavily on the minds of those left behind. The battlefronts stretched across vast distances, from the icy moons of distant planets to the fiery depths of asteroid fields. Human ships engaged the alien fleet in all-out war. As human ingenuity and determination outmatched the invaders' advanced technology, the universe began to take notice. The Galactic Council, once so certain of Earth's failure, began to question the reality of the invasion. Could the unthinkable happen? Could Earth actually win this war? On Earth, however, things were far from calm. In cities that were once caught in the chaos of bombardment, life was slowly beginning to return to normal. Humans, ever resourceful, had begun to rebuild. The soldiers who had returned from the front lines became symbols of hope for the people. Their bravery had shown the galaxy that humanity was more than just a species to be conquered. They were a force to be reckoned with. Yet, the war was far from won. The invading empire still had the upper hand in terms of sheer numbers and technology. Humanity's greatest asset remained its resolve and ability to adapt. But with each passing day, as Earth's forces pushed forward, the invaders found themselves on the back foot. The invaders' leadership scrambled to find a way to reclaim their dominance. They knew their fleet was weakening, but their pride and arrogance made it hard for them to accept defeat. The Empire's most powerful commanders began to make drastic decisions, some of which would shape the course of the war in ways no one could predict. As Earth's forces continued to press forward, a new weapon was revealed. The invaders had unveiled their final trump card, a massive planet-killing ship capable of destroying entire worlds in an instant. It was their last hope to crush Earth's resistance, but it came with a heavy cost. If they used it, the galaxy would know that their empire was not just a force of war, but of destruction. The Earth Defense Coalition was now faced with an impossible choice: fight back against this new weapon and risk the total destruction of everything, or find a way to defeat it before it could be used. It was clear that Earth's fight for survival had entered its most dangerous phase yet. Dr. Haywood and her team went back to the drawing board. They had developed new strategies, but the alien weapon was unlike anything they had faced before. It was a race against time to figure out how to counter it. Meanwhile, military leaders around the world were preparing their forces for the biggest battle of their lives. Earth's resistance was no longer just about fighting for survival. It was about stopping an enemy that would stop at nothing to erase humanity from the galaxy. In the face of overwhelming odds, humanity's courage was put to the test like never before. But the people of Earth had learned one very important lesson: never underestimate them. Their greatest strength was not their technology, nor their tactics. It was their will to fight, no matter the cost. And so, as the final showdown loomed closer, humanity prepared for its greatest test yet. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the galaxy itself, hung in the balance. Would Earth's forces rise to meet the invaders' final weapon, or would the galaxy bear witness to the extinction of humanity? The answer would be decided on the battlefield, and the stakes had never been higher. The skies above Earth were darkened by the threat of a shadow that loomed larger with every passing day. The invaders' massive planet killer ship, a monstrous weapon capable of wiping out entire civilizations with a single blast, was now on its way toward Earth. It was their ultimate weapon, the last thing they had to use to finish what they had started. If this weapon fired, it would mean the end of humanity. On Earth, the entire world braced itself. News of the weapon's arrival had sent ripples of panic through the population, but it also ignited an unstoppable determination. Soldiers, civilians, and governments alike united under one common goal: stop the invaders from unleashing this catastrophic force. The military forces of Earth gathered in the final preparations, ready to make their stand against the enemy. They knew this might be their last chance. The world had already fought too long and too hard to give up now. There was no other option but to give everything they had in this last battle. Dr. Clara Haywood, the brilliant strategist who had helped tip the scales of war with her hacking skills, had a heavy burden on her shoulders. The planet killer was unlike any weapon Earth had ever faced. She was part of a team racing against time to find a way to disable it before it reached Earth's atmosphere. In the command center, Haywood's fingers flew across the holographic interface, analyzing data that came in faster than she could process. The invader's ship was nearing the edge of the solar system, and there was little time left. The team had tried everything, every strategy, every plan, but nothing seemed capable of stopping the weapon in time. The targeting system is locked onto Earth's capital, Haywood muttered to herself. If we don't disable it, the damage will be unimaginable. Outside, in the skies above Earth, the final battle had begun. The Earth Defense Coalition's fleet, a ragtag but determined collection of military ships, surged toward the invader's ship in one final offensive. It was clear this was no longer just a war for survival. It was a fight for the soul of humanity. If they failed, Earth would be nothing more than a forgotten dust in the universe. But if they succeeded, it would be a victory the galaxy would never forget. The alien fleet, now desperate and weakened, had begun to form a defensive line around their planet killer. They knew the weapon had to be protected at all costs. With every passing second, the Earth forces pushed harder, determined to find a way through the enemy defenses. Inside the command center, Haywood stared at the digital map of the enemy ship. It was surrounded by an impenetrable shield, powered by a core that protected it from all attacks. No conventional weapon could pierce the shield. Earth's forces were outgunned and outnumbered, but they still had one advantage: the element of surprise. "We don't have much time left," one of Haywood's colleagues said, his voice tight with anxiety. "If we don't find a way to shut down that weapon, it's over." "I have an idea," Haywood said suddenly. "But it's risky. It's a long shot, but it's all we've got." She turned toward her team, her face set with determination. "We'll infiltrate the ship's systems and use their own technology against them. We'll disable their shields from the inside." The plan was bold, perhaps too bold, but there was no room for hesitation. It was the only option left. Meanwhile, on Earth's front lines, the battle raged on. The Coalition's fleet had begun launching wave after wave of attacks, trying to breach the alien defenses. Their cannons fired relentlessly at the enemy ships, but the invaders' weapons were devastatingly efficient, destroying human vessels with frightening speed. But Earth's forces had a secret weapon of their own. The very same virus that had brought down the invaders' neural networks earlier in the war was being reactivated. This time, it was not just a virus to weaken their fleet. It was designed to infiltrate their planet killer weapon and take control of its systems. As the fleet engaged the enemy, Dr. Haywood's team worked frantically to upload the virus to the invaders' command hub. They had one shot, and they knew that failure meant total annihilation. Time was running out. "Virus uploaded," one of the technicians shouted, as the final code was sent into the heart of the enemy ship. The command center went silent as they watched the systems inside the invaders' ship flicker. A long breath of hope swept through the team as they saw the first signs of success. But then, everything went wrong. The invaders had anticipated this move. They had built in a failsafe, a backup defense system. The virus was fighting against a new wave of security protocols, and it was losing. "We're not out of the woods yet," Haywood said, her voice calm despite the panic that was beginning to surge in the room. "I'll need 5 more minutes. Just hold them off for 5 minutes." Outside, the battle seemed endless. Human soldiers fought bravely, but the invaders were relentless, determined to protect their weapon at all costs. 5 minutes. That was all they had. The fate of Earth hung in the balance. As Haywood fought to gain control of the invaders' ship, Earth's fleet gave everything it had. Human ingenuity and courage were on full display as they dodged enemy fire, launched daring counterattacks, and pushed forward in the face of certain destruction. They had no choice. Earth's last hope was to succeed or perish. And so, as the final moments approached, Earth's forces and Dr. Haywood's team would have to work together to defy the odds and change the fate of the galaxy forever. The enemy ship hovered ominously over Earth, its massive hull casting an intimidating shadow across the planet. Time had nearly run out. Dr. Clara Haywood's heart raced as she watched the last stages of the countdown. The invaders' ultimate weapon was ready, poised to destroy everything humanity had ever fought for. But there was still hope, if she could just buy them a little more time. The room fell into a tense silence as Haywood's fingers flew across the control panel, trying to keep the virus active inside the enemy's defense systems. Come on," she muttered under her breath, her voice barely audible. Outside, the Earth Defense Coalition's fleet clashed with the invaders' remaining forces, their ships locked in a vicious struggle for survival. The massive guns of the invaders' planet killer hummed with lethal power, and each shot was a reminder that they had only moments before humanity's fate was sealed. "We're running out of time," Captain Derek Riley, the commander of Earth's flagship, said over the comms, his voice filled with urgency. "We can't keep them off for much longer, Haywood. We need that weapon down now." Haywood's mind raced. She knew Riley was right. The enemy fleet was too powerful, their weapons too advanced. Earth's forces were being pushed to their breaking point. If she failed now, all would be lost. But if the virus could just finish its job, the shields would fall, and Earth's fleet would have a fighting chance. Her fingers hesitated for a moment as she looked at the final lines of code on her screen. The virus was barely holding on. She quickly initiated the final sequence, praying that the aliens' defense systems would buckle. Just as she hit enter, the entire command center was jolted by a powerful tremor. The planet killer ship had fired its first shot, directly at Earth's capital. The blast sent shockwaves through the atmosphere, and for a moment, Haywood thought she had failed. The beam tore through the sky, a terrible streak of white energy racing toward the planet. It was a moment of terror, one that could have been humanity's last. Then, just as the beam neared Earth, the impossible happened. The shield around the invader's weapon flickered, then sputtered out. The blast from the planet killer faltered. The energy beam wavered and scattered as the weapon's systems malfunctioned. "We did it," shouted one of the technicians in the command center as the status lights on Haywood's control panel began to change. "The shields are down. The virus has disabled them." Haywood felt a surge of relief wash over her, but there was no time to celebrate. Earth's fleet immediately launched everything they had. Every last missile, every laser cannon, every fighter craft. This was their one shot. "We're clear for impact," Captain Riley shouted over the comms. "Everyone, fire." The skies above Earth erupted in an explosion of light as missiles and laser beams raced toward the invaders' ship. In the heart of the enemy vessel, the invaders realized they had lost. Their weapon, their pride, was falling apart. Panic spread among the remaining forces, but the fight was far from over. The invaders retaliated with everything they had left, launching desperate counterattacks. But it was too late. The virus had already infiltrated their ship's core, causing widespread chaos. The invaders' leadership could only watch in horror as their most powerful weapon crumbled before their eyes. Captain Riley's voice came through the comms again, this time filled with relief. "We've done it. The invader's ship is going down. But just as hope seemed to rise, a new, more terrifying threat emerged. Out of the depths of space, another massive fleet appeared on the edge of the solar system. They were different, their ships far more advanced and deadly than the previous invaders. They didn't engage directly, but their presence alone was enough to send a chill through the command center. "Who are they?" Haywood gasped, watching as the new fleet slowly moved into position. "They're here," a voice from the comms replied grimly. "The real enemy. The ones who've been pulling the strings all along." The final battle was far from over. The destruction of the invader's planet killer had won Earth a temporary victory, but a darker and more formidable force was now on the horizon. This new enemy would prove to be humanity's greatest challenge yet, but for now, the hope of victory remained alive, burning brightly in the hearts of all who had fought for their survival. Humanity had proven that it would not bow to any invader, no matter the odds. Earth had won the first battle in the war for its survival, but the real fight had just begun. As Earth's fleet regrouped and prepared for the next challenge, one thing was clear: humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. It had become a force to be reckoned with, and the universe would never look at Earth the same way again.